the sensitivities in the country right now mean that any wrong move would cause civil strife that might lead to a civil war. If you do a wrong move here, it could blow up Lebanon internally.
So Lebanon has been pounded by Israel for weeks and weeks now. And this comes on top of a devastating 2024 war in which Israel pounded allegedly Hezbollah positions, but a lot more people were attacked. I think that two images really stand out and have done perhaps irreparable harm at this point this week from the Israelis' latest incursion into southern Lebanon. One was this picture of an Israeli soldier smashing a crucifix that was in some Christian family's home. This went viral and prompted a reply from Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the soldier will be investigated. We'll see about that. The other was this video or images of this IDF woman in someone's house in southern Lebanon, basically feasting on fresh food. As anyone who's ever been to southern Lebanon knows how beautiful it is, how lush, how verdant, and so on. This has been a very impactful part of the Iran war that merits much more attention. I'm Borzu Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands. You can find it at borzu.substack.com. You can also find it on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. I'm joined today by Jad El-Dilati. He is an analyst and researcher, senior fellow at the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. It is a left-leaning think tank based in Washington, but with analysts pretty much all over the Arab world, all over the Middle East. And he is a native of Nabatea. That is a very storied town in southern Lebanon that I've visited. I actually have a good friend from Nabatea that met their family and so on. A beautiful hilltop area in southern Lebanon that has been pummeled numerous times in Israeli onslaughts. And anyway, Jad, welcome. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So just give us a big picture, Jad. What is the scene right now in southern Lebanon, Beirut? You know, the Americans and the Israelis and even the Iranians say, hey, we got a ceasefire. Is that the case?
I think my parents recently went back to our home in Nabatea after being displaced for 45 days. And my dad described it pretty well, actually. He told me Nabatea is dead. Civilian infrastructure has been pummeled, as you said. The market, the souk in Nabatea, which goes back to the Mamluk era, has been destroyed even further. And that is added on top of destruction that had existed in 2024. Back in 2024, there was an attempt to erase Nabatea's identity by destroying its historic souk. And now there has been destruction added on top of existing destruction. And so the souk, which is Nabatea's lifeline, really,
the marketplace.
Exactly the marketplace. It's economic lifeline, but it's also this hub for community, absolutely, and for social relations. That has been destroyed. And the reason why it's dead, frankly, is because a considerable number of people did go back, but then they ended up returning back to safer areas in Beirut and in the north because they were in Nabatea for a couple of days and all they heard were controlled demolitions, artillery shelling, echoing from the villages and towns under the yellow line that Israel established in South Lebanon. So there was a truce or a ceasefire, if you will, but it was obviously not respected. And people were anxious that at any point the two sides, Hezbollah and Israel, would start fighting again, and the fighting would resume. And so even though there is currently a ceasefire right now, if you go to South Lebanon, you're going to notice that it's largely empty. There have been some restaurants, some shops that have opened to try to establish some form of normalcy with this instability, but people are not comfortable. The scenes we saw at the end of the 2024 war on the 28th of November of 2024 are not like what we're seeing now. People don't trust the Israeli side anymore. And then there are other people, Hezbollah supporting people who I've spoken to some of them. They told me they went back so they can give space for fighters to fire Israel and to fire at Israel and be comfortable in the south. So it is uh, people are lost, people are anxious, they don't know if this will last or not. And frankly, there hasn't been clear messaging on anything. And actually, just before we started this episode, the first Israeli airstrike from a fighter jet hit a village called Wadi al-Hijr, which is more or less right on the Litani River in South Lebanon. So that is adding to the anxiety and adding to that fear that things might resume. And it is just muddy, and there isn't any clear path forward. And frankly, because people know and have memories from the ceasefire period between November of 2024 and the 1st of March, really, when the 6 rockets were fired. Ceasefire period was not really a ceasefire. It wasn't a pause in violence. I was living in South Lebanon at the time. I was living in Nabatiyah. There were near daily military operations, whether that is airstrikes or controlled demolitions or artillery shelling. But also, and frankly, more importantly, many tens, or actually I'd say hundreds of thousands of people didn't go back to South Lebanon because there's nothing to go back to. Their homes have been either destroyed or occupied. And this is going to cause a massive social and humanitarian catastrophe that not a lot of people are talking about. So what do you do with over 100,000 people who will be near permanently displaced?
Is that the population of south of the Litani? 100,000 people, more than
It
100,000?
is so. It is significantly more than that because Lebanon's last census happened in 1932. It is
Sure.
difficult
Yeah.
to specify the number, but it ranges. Some estimates say 300,000 people. Some reach up to 600,000 people. But I think it's safe to say that about 300,000 people live there. And not everyone below the Litani River hasn't been able to go back. I have friends who are
Have gone.
from
Seriously, like,
Tyre.
yeah,
Yes,
from
from Tyr,
Sur,
even
from
though
Tyre.
yes, from Sur, even though it's below the Litani River, but they did go back.
Yeah,
But at least people from the border villages, reaching all the way to Bint Jbeil
yeah.
and Yuhmor, will not be able to go back. And I think it's important to acknowledge for viewers and listeners here that this number of displaced people is being added on top of near 80,000 people who were displaced even before the March 2nd war started,
Yeah.
who were displaced during the ceasefire period because Israel was occupying five what are called strategic hilltops in South Lebanon, where I mean these areas belonged to people. People had houses there, had lands there. I know someone who had recently bought land in Marwahin and suddenly found it occupied.
Yeah.
And that is of course other than the fact that anyone who was getting close to these hilltops was getting shot at, including the Lebanese armed forces, the Lebanese army.
And even UNIFIL. Hey,
Yes,
one thing I wanted to ask you, that UNIFIL is the United Nations peacekeeping force that has been there in southern Lebanon since the Israeli occupation that ended in the 2000s, the 1980s and 1990s occupation. One thing I wanted to ask you, one of the most disturbing things that I heard and communications that I heard from the Israeli side, and there's been a lot of disturbing stuff from the Israeli side, but one of the
sure.
most disturbing was this: if you're hiding a Shia, not a Hezbollah member, warning to the Christians and Sunnis, and I presume some Druze villages that are in the south of Lebanon, if you are hiding a Shia person, be careful because you will be targeted. I mean, how is that interpreted? I'm curious to ask you, and I've been curious. Was that abided by? Did people start turning in the Shia people who were hiding in their attics? Or was it seen for what it was, an attempt to stoke civil war?
That's a great question. There is certainly, I think it would be analytically incorrect not to assume that displacement is getting weaponized to deepen sectarian divisions in Lebanon and potentially cause civil strife or civil war. And actually, just very this morning, to add to your example, it was reported by the mayor of one of these Christian villages that are mainly Ramesh and Ibil and Dibil, I believe, that they received aid from the IDF,
Hmm.
which comes to show you the separation that is happening. And certainly, there have been tactics implemented by the Israeli side to deepen sectarian divisions. And unfortunately, had the ceasefire not come into effect last Thursday, I had, and they still exist, but I had growing concerns that the country was going to collapse into a civil war. There are several tactics we can talk about here. One of them being this clear separation between um, Christian host communities and displaced Shia communities. Earlier in the war, Israeli Defense Minister Katz explicitly said the hundreds of thousands of Shias, not people, not militants, who are leaving their villages and towns in South Lebanon, will not be able to go back to it until the security of the northern settlers is guaranteed. This is the one of the very few times that he referred to a religious group, not an armed or not an armed group, not everyone. He said Shias to conflate Hezbollah with Shias. You can add to that several other things like airstrikes in historically safe areas in the north of Lebanon. These historically safe areas are either Sunni areas or Christian areas. And for context here, when I say historically safe, I mean areas which in the Lebanese 2006 war and the 2024 war were not hit or targeted.
Yeah.
And there were airstrikes on buildings housing displaced people, whether that is hotels or whether that is just regular residential buildings. And the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of that, as we saw, was landlords and the community representatives or the community leaders kicking out all displaced people in the area. Um, and here you can clearly see that sectarian dynamic when, for example, the first evacuation warning of the southern suburb of Beirut, Dahiyeh, explicitly mentioned in the map that people should head east towards Metin, which is Christian, or north towards Tripoli, that is Sunni, in a clear attempt to draw the distinction between displaced Shias who pose a threat to their displaced communities and between to their host communities and between Christians and Sunnis. And then we saw it shortly after the Black Wednesday attacks 2 weeks ago, which were, for anyone who doesn't know, 100 airstrikes in 10 minutes on Beirut.
Killing like
Um,
400 people or something like that. Yes.
Exactly, killing nearly 400 people and injuring thousands. After that, the Israeli Arabic spokesperson Afichai Adrai posted a tweet saying that we're now exposing Hezbollah. Hezbollah has left Dahiyeh and is now sheltering in Christian areas in Beirut. That distinction was very, very clear. And when you add to that this massive international pressure of militarily confronting Hezbollah to disarm them, that was put on the Lebanese army and mainly the army general, you see how much the country was tense. And you know, Lebanon is great in its pluralism. I mean, it has 18 recognized sects, but the system that holds this pluralism together is very sensitive and cannot absorb a shock of this magnitude. And now even though there is a ceasefire, there is some work to be done after the war of the ceasefire holds, because as I mentioned earlier, there are more than 100,000 displaced people who will remain sheltering in these safe areas because they have nowhere to go back to. And it's up to the Lebanese government to see how to navigate that tension and make sure that these sectarian fractures aren't deepened further.
How would you describe the level of anger and hostility towards Hezbollah right now in the general public? I know this is a sensitive question, and you have to probably answer it carefully if you want to go back to Nabatia. Nabat, if I okay. So, like, how would you, is there a lot of anger towards Hezbollah for dragging dragging Lebanon into what was this Iran-Israel war? Is there any sympathy? Is there any understanding? Do people in Lebanon buy the line that, hey, we were going to be targeted anyway, that we were just on the firing block, that the ceasefire never ended, as Hezbollah and its advocates argue? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to answer this question very honestly, and I think it deserves nuance because often when people get asked this, I think they leave a lot of nuance off the table. Um, right after Hezbollah fired rockets into Israel on the
Second
early
of
in the
March.
morning on the 2nd of March, there certainly was anger and frustration from Shias against Hezbollah, unlike anything I've ever seen before in my life, truly. Um, because it felt like Lebanon was dragged into this war, this regional war. Certainly, the ceasefire period was unstable, and it still had violence. I mean, more than 300 people were killed during the ceasefire period alone. But at the same time, people were home in Nabatiyah, in surrounding villages, in Tyre, in certain areas in South
In
Lebanon.
Bint Jbeil.
Uh,
Yeah.
Exactly. In Bint Jbeil,
Yeah.
exactly. Bint Jbeil wasn't destroyed.
Yeah.
And because people it's sad, but people now know what kind of response this disproportionate and uh, uh, response from the Israeli side, people were scared of what was going to come, and you could see it in the what you could hear it in the voice of the woman who recorded the rockets being fired. Her voice was cracking because she feared what is to come. That is not to say that that anger remained.
Hmm.
Shortly after, I'd say in the couple of weeks following that, because of the intensity of the Israeli response and how many people Israel was killing. I mean, on average, it was about 100 people every day during the first 2 weeks. 20% of those are children. And because of the destruction that they were causing, and airstrikes in Beirut, airstrikes on hotels in safe areas, I can confidently say that that anger and frustration quickly turned into simply anger towards Israel.
So they overdid
Uh,
it, as they always did, as they did with Gaza. They went overboard. They basically failed because they have no sense of proportion or
exactly,
measure.
exactly. And here I'm talking specifically about the Shia community.
Yes.
And sure, I mean there are still some anti-Hizb Shias who still oppose what was done on on the 2nd of March. I mean, I think it was ridiculous. But at the same time, um, because of because people are people's homes have been destroyed, people's towns have been occupied. There certainly is anger towards the occupier.
Yeah.
And this brings us actually back to the period between 1982 and 2000, where Hezbollah was seen in 2000 as the liberator of the South. And it gained legitimacy during the Israeli occupation. Now the same thing is happening. People are justifying the existence of the armed resistance because a part of Lebanon is occupied. Um,
Would you say that there is a dynamic like that as well in parts of the Christian community or not at all?
I mean, there are exceptions. There is a minority that supports that, but I would say no. The
That supports
majority
what?
of
That supports Hezbollah.
that supports armed resistance, but it is a very very tiny minority.
Okay.
The truth is, most Christians and most Sunnis in the country are
Opposed to
now
Hezbollah.
more hateful towards Hezbollah than ever, and support anything that disarms them. I would say the common factor between everyone, frankly, is that no one wants to see a war happen every 2 years.
Yeah,
No one, everyone wants stability and peace to be permanent. The way to achieve that is where people disagree. And obviously, people disagree of the concept of a parallel armed group in the country that
sure. Yeah.
fights
That's more
instead of the
powerful than
Lebanese
the
army.
army, that's more powerful than the police. Yes. That has a
Exactly,
political branch,
exactly,
that has seats in
and
parliament. Yes, it's
exactly, and objectively,
dysfunctional by definition.
exactly, and objectively, it is just impossible for a country to progress by having two armies, where
Yeah.
the non-state army is stronger than the state one. It is, but the way to reach that, as I said, is the point of difference, because the sensitivities in the country right now mean that any wrong move would cause civil strife that might lead to a civil war. And this is why the position that the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Nawaf Salam, the President Joseph Aoun, and the Army General Rudolf Haikal is not one I envy, because there is this massive responsibility,
And this
and there is
massive
to be
danger. Yes.
exactly, and that is to be seen if that's going to be handled well or not.
With regard to Hezbollah, is there any indication that they are abiding by any requests by the Lebanese population? Is there any sign that they're disarming, toning it down? Is there any regret?
Well, I mean, they are still abiding by the ceasefire, even though Israel has continued to demolish villages and towns in South Lebanon, and it has done like a couple of drone attacks, and today an airstrike. Hezbollah has not fired back, and they're still abiding by this 10-day ceasefire. Um, and before the war, it's important to mention that the Lebanese army in December of 2025 did announced that it had established operational control of the area south of the Litani River,
Hmm.
which means that, according to them, the area south of the Litani River was an area free of any non-state weapons. And actually, U.S. Central Command confirmed this shortly before that. They explicitly said and talked and described how the Lebanese army was disarming Hezbollah, talking about addressing
So are you
unexploded
saying that
ordnance.
the rockets that were fired into northern Israel from Lebanon came from north of the Litani?
Well, that's the thing. I think they had a blind spot, and while Hezbollah was openly talking about cooperating with the army south of the Litani, not north of it, because I'll talk in a bit about that point of the difference.
Uh-huh.
It seems that that wasn't fully factual, but actually, even the Israeli army itself said that um, most of the attacks were happening from north of the Litani
Yeah,
River
and
rather than
even
from south of it. Be-
with the rockets that Lebanon has, they can even fire into northern Israel from the Bekaa
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Valley,
yeah, yeah,
etc. So
yeah.
you don't need that close of range
Yeah,
anymore.
and actually, so that was a point of difference during the entire ceasefire period, because the ceasefire agreement talked about disarming, starting from south of the Litani. What Hezbollah interpreted that as Litani and going south, so the southernmost area of Lebanon. What the rest of the world, including the Lebanese government and its army, interpreted that as south of the Litani going north. So Hezbollah was explicitly saying that they won't cooperate to disarm north of the Litani.
Mm.
And this is why now, I mean, with these talks happening between Lebanon and Israel, like that elephant in the room is not addressed. how 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 will you do it? Because as you mentioned, and as I said earlier, Hezbollah is still present both militarily and politically in Lebanon. Anyone who denies that is just denying something factual. And if they're still denying disarmament, I mean, yesterday, a member of parliament belonging to Hezbollah, Fadlallah, said that no external or internal power can disarm the resistance. And he also said that they will combat Israel's yellow line through resistance. So and again, if you do a wrong move here, it could blow up Lebanon internally. So yeah, think you can see how complex and how sensitive this environment is, and obviously the Israelis are using that and exploiting that to deepen these divisions and to continue. Interpreting the current ceasefire as they wish, because the State Department did give them a right to defend themselves, but that is extremely broad and can be interpreted in any way.
I don't understand how anyone, even Hezbollah, could see what it did as defending Lebanon. I mean, they did do damage to Israel. They created chaos in Israel since Nasrallah was killed. Do you think, and how do you think Hezbollah has adapted? Has it learned any lessons from that experience tactically or strategically? Has it tried to perhaps, find a way into the like a Lebanese political scene that it's more embraced and seen as part of Lebanon and not just an Iranian actor?
So tactically, I'm not a military expert, but military experts say that Hezbollah changed its military tactics on the ground from acting as an organized army to more guerrilla warfare, which it used to implement between 1982 and 2000, and also partly during the 2006 Lebanon-Israel war. So they have changed that. Politically, no, nothing. I mean, one of my frustrations, frankly, is that Lebanon had an opportunity during the ceasefire period to build a state, you know, that is representative of all its sects, of all its religious groups. But Hezbollah did not engage in that, as well as political wing, did not engage in that
Why was it Hezbollah's
in that
decision or
state
was it?
building. Well, I mean, they claim that both the president and the prime minister were not were parachuted on Lebanon by the Americans, and they're not gonna cooperate. They're not gonna cooperate with two people who they don't see as representatives of Lebanese interests. But ironically, Hezbollah's parliamentary bloc gave trust in the government. Like we have something called a trust building,
Sure.
trust, like a session to
Confidence
give trust
vote,
to the government.
vote of
Exactly, a confidence
confidence.
vote,
Yeah.
a vote of confidence, and Hezbollah parliamentarians voted for that. And not just that, I mean, Hezbollah's members of parliament voted on self-extending the Lebanese parliament for 2 more years, which automatically self-extends the government's period for 2 more years. So there is some hypocrisy there.
Yeah.
In terms of has Hezbollah admitted or acknowledged like certain vulnerabilities? No, I mean after following the ceasefire announcement last Thursday, the only things that were said is that we won. But what is winning here when people are unable to go back to
But
the south? When
I mean, and
like
and who's we? So yeah, I mean, one could make a credible argument that Iran won this particular round strategically by taking control of the Strait of Hormuz. But what did Lebanon get out of this? And really, in a way, what did Hezbollah get out of this? I mean, from even from their point of view of fighting against Israel, they're 10 miles back, and their grandparents' villages have been destroyed. So
Well, the victory they claim. So there are two types of victories: a defensive victory and a strategic victory. They claim that they achieved defensive victory because Israel entered Lebanon with the goal of dismantling Hezbollah, and they failed to do that. I mean, even the Israeli officials from the Israeli army itself said that the disarmament of Hezbollah will not be fully done through a military campaign. It has to be done internally in Lebanon. So they claim that because they managed to deter the IDF and except one here has to question what deterrence is when the IDF reached Bint Jbel and is now blowing up areas in Bint Jbel
It does look
and there's
like it does seem like the IDF is a little spooked by its experience of going into Lebanon. It experienced much more casualties on the ground than it anticipated. I suppose that Hezbollah could say that, it managed to, kill a lot more Israeli
yeah,
soldiers.
I mean,
But
it
other
has to
than
be
that,
exactly. It has to be acknowledged that tactically, by damaging Merkava tanks and by, frankly, after a year and a half of disarmament south of the Litani and the IDF claiming that south of the Litani is now an area that won't pose any threat on the northern settlements anymore, it is noteworthy to them, and it is they can. I think it is legitimate to claim that there are military victories when militants emerge from a destroyed area like the border towns.
sure.
Except I think I don't. I personally don't even care about this victory, whether Israel announced victory, whether Hezbollah announced victory, whether Lebanese president announced victory. I don't care. What I care about is the reality on the ground. And that is that my parents and my family is unable to stay in Nabatiyah for more than 2 days at a time. I care about more than 1 million people not being able to plan ahead for next week because they don't know what's awaiting them. And I care about my country, that part of it is being occupied, a part which I love dearly, which I grew up in, and a country which will suffer more than ever on reconstruction. It's important to mention here, for context, that Lebanon needed $11 billion before this war for recovery. And now the World Bank hasn't estimated yet, but about 40,000 additional units were destroyed during this war alone, adding billions of dollars to that $11 billion in a country that has been in economic freefall since 2019. That's what I care about, and I care about how to solve this. And solving it needs solidarity and needs everyone in the country to be aligned on the importance of saving Lebanon, both internally and externally. There is certainly a need for full Israeli withdrawal from South Lebanon. We need to. Israel still has more than 20. I think it's probably more than 30 now. Hostages in Israel. These are Lebanese people that must be returned, and we have to ensure that peace lasts for more than 2 years at a time. Otherwise, no country can progress with such a volatile environment that doesn't attract any source of hope or any investment from both politically, economically, internally and externally.
Jad, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. This has been really informative and really engaging.
Thank you so much, Borzu. Thanks for having me.
Again, this is the Badlands Podcast. I'm Borzu Deragahi. You can find me at my Substack at Borzou, BORZOU.substack.com. Thank you so much for listening or watching.